The massive chamber of the Galactic Congress had never felt smaller as Ambassador Jinsu watched the holographic displays flicker with images of approaching death. 7 months ago, the Outer Rim monitoring stations had detected them, ships, moving at impossible speeds, their black hulls absorbing light like hungry voids. The automated fleet of the extinct Caracol civilization had awakened after 15 million years of drifting through the dark between galaxies. Around him, representatives from 100 worlds shifted nervously. The Zephyrians, beings of living, crystal chimed like broken glass as they communicated in frequencies that made human teeth ache. The swarm collective delegate twitched its chitinous limbs while its 1,000 minds processed the data simultaneously. Above them all, the gaseous celestials floated in containment fields, their thoughts visible as swirling colors in their translucent bodies. Jinsu rubbed his tired eyes. At 67, he was old for a human diplomat, but young by galactic standards. Most species in the Congress had been traveling between stars when Earth was still cooling from its formation. They looked at humanity, the way adults looked at children playing with weapons, concerned, condescending, and slightly afraid. "The data is conclusive," announced Prism 799, the vegan crystalline delegate. Its faceted body reflected the holographic displays from 1,000 angles, creating a dizzying light show. The Caracol War fleet consists of approximately 150,000 vessels, each measuring between 5 and 50 kilometers in length. Their weapons can shatter moons, and their shields have withstood the heat of dying stars. The chamber filled with the sounds of fear, clicking, chittering, telepathic static, and electromagnetic wails. Even the Vorthan, usually so proud of their military might, had gone silent. Their metal-plated warriors, evolved from a world of constant warfare, looked like frightened children faced with a nightmare beyond imagination. Jinsu watched the tactical hologram rotate slowly above the central platform. The approaching ships moved in perfect formation, like a plague of metal locusts descending on a field of wheat. Red markers showed the predicted path of destruction, 37 inhabited systems in the first wave alone. In the margins of the display, casualty estimates scrolled past in cold, clinical numbers that somehow failed to capture the true horror of what was coming. "We have run 10 million scenario simulations," reported the Swarm Collective through its speaker organism, an insect-like creature with too many eyes. In 97.3% of cases, direct engagement results in total extinction of the defending force within 7 standard time units. In the remaining 2.7%, extinction is delayed by a maximum of 8.2 units. General Do-hyun, standing beside Jinsu, whispered, "They're talking about the deaths of trillions like it's a math problem." The celestial that served as the Congress's military advisor pulsed with deep purple hues, the color of resignation in their species. The Caracol were the apex predators of Andromeda Galaxy. Their automated fleets were the reason for our ancestors' exodus to this galaxy 15 million years ago. They were built to destroy everything that wasn't Caracol, and they never learned how to stop. "Which is why," interrupted Arc Commander Stellar Wind Rising of the Hegemony, "evacuation is our only rational response. The inner systems can be defended. The outer rim cannot." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Tau Merchants Guild representative, a blob-like creature in a mechanical exoskeleton, projected financial calculations showing the cost of evacuation versus the cost of attempted defense. The numbers were staggering, but still better than total extinction. Ambassador Ye-jin, Jinsu's aide, pulled up additional data on her tablet. "Sir, they're right about the Caracol fleet's capabilities. Their ships are self-repairing, fusion-powered, and designed by a civilization that considered warfare an art form. They've been drifting through space for longer than most species in this room have existed." Jinsu nodded, but something in his gut rebelled against the cold logic of retreat. He thought about the colony of New Pusan, where his daughter Haya Young was raising his grandchildren. About the mining stations near Proxima Centauri, where tough Korean families had carved out a life in the asteroid belts. About the agricultural worlds where rice paddies grew under alien suns, feeding half the galaxy. The hologram shifted, showing estimated timelines for evacuation. Species after species announced their withdrawal plans. The Zephyrians would move their crystal cities to mobile platforms. The hegemony would simply burn whatever they couldn't carry. The Tau were already calculating profit margins on refugee transportation. "And what of the humans?" asked the Congress chair, an ancient being whose species had long ago transcended physical form. It existed as pure energy, communicating through controlled electromagnetic pulses. Jinsu stood slowly, feeling every one of his years in his bones. Around him, hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and detection organs focused on him. The weight of their collective attention was almost physical. "The Sol Federation has reviewed the data," he began, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. "We acknowledge the threat. We understand the probability calculations." He paused, looking at the holographic display one more time. The red markers marking the path of destruction included Earth, Mars, the Jupiter colonies, and everything humanity had built in 3 centuries of expansion. "We will not abandon our worlds," he said simply. "We will fight." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. The Zephyrians' chiming reached painful frequencies. The swarm collective buzzed with agitation. Even the usually stoic hegemony showed surprise, their warriors' armor changing color with emotional regulation systems. Prism 799 practically vibrated with disbelief. "Ambassador, your species is 300 standard cycles old in space. You have no weapons that can penetrate caracol shielding. Your ships are metal and composite, not programmable matter. You understand tactics that are millennia obsolete." Jinsu replied quietly. "We understand duty. We understand that someone needs to buy time for your evacuation. And we understand that our people, our families, our children, deserve better than abandonment." The Vorthan war chief, scarred from countless battles, spoke for the first time. "Human Jinsu, this is not war. This is extermination. The caracol machines know only destruction. They cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with. They will keep coming until there is nothing left to destroy. Then we'll have to be unreasonable," Jinsu replied with a thin smile. As the session dissolved into arguments and emergency consultation, Captain Sora of the human flagship, Indomitable, received her orders through encrypted channels. She stood on the bridge, looking out at the human fleet assembling at the edge of Sol system. It wasn't much to look at. No sleek hegemony dreadnoughts with their reality-bending weapons, no Zephyrian crystal ships that could reshape themselves at will, no swarm bioships that grew new weapons on command. The human fleet was conversion, jobs and experimental craft, mining ships with military upgrades, and civilian vessels pressed into service. "Ma'am," called Navigation Officer Kaiwu, "we're getting updates from the other fleets. The hegemony's main force is jumping to the galactic core. The Zephyrians are shifting to higher dimensions. The swarm is dispersing according to contingency Swarm Prime 7. Sora nodded, her jaw tight. "And us?" Communications Officer Da Jung looked up from her station. "Ambassador Jinsu's final message just came through. We hold the line at Sol's edge. No retreat." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Outside the viewports, the other ships of the human fleet maintained formation. 30,000 vessels of various sizes and capabilities, all that stood between the caracol and the fleeing populations of 100 worlds. "Well," Sora said, "finally, I guess we show them what 300 years of human stubbornness looks like." She turned to her crew, seeing fear and determination in equal measure on their faces. These weren't the genetically modified warriors of the hegemony or the hive-minded soldiers of the swarm. They were farmers and miners, merchants and scientists, dreamers and builders. They were human. "All stations prepare for incoming transmission," she ordered. The view screen flickered to life, showing Ambassador Jinsu's weather face against the backdrop of the Indomitable's command center. "To all ships of the Sol Defense." "Fleet," he began, his voice carrying across 30,000 vessels and millions of personnel. "Today we stand alone. The great powers of the galaxy have calculated their odds and chosen retreat. They call us fools, barbarians, children playing at war." He paused, and when he continued, there was steel in his voice. "They're probably right. We are fools. We're fools who chose to plant rice on barren planets, fools who chose to mine asteroids with hand tools, fools who chose to build homes in the dark between stars. And today, we choose to be fools one more time." The transmission ended, and Sora felt a strange calm settle over her. Around her, the bridge crew went about their duties with quiet determination. In the distance, the first automated sensors detected motion at the edge of the system, something vast and dark, moving faster than physics should allow. The caracol had come to Solance. The first human colony died at 0300 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The research station at Kepler 442b simply stopped transmitting mid-sentence. Dr. Wansik had been sending routine data about atmospheric processes when the signal cut to static. 3 hours later, the orbital monitoring platforms detected debris, metallic, fragments that sparkled like deadly stars against the black. Captain Sora watched the attack recordings in her ready room, aboard the Indomitable. The caracol ships had emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, 7 massive dreadnoughts arranged like spear points. Each vessel was shaped like a twisted obsidian blade, its surface rippling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. The energy burst that destroyed Kepler Station lasted exactly 0.3 seconds. No demands, no warnings, no communication attempts, reported her intelligence officer, Sang-woo. They just deleted everything. The door chimed and Engineer Hee-jin entered carrying a data pad. "Ma'am, we've analyzed the energy signatures. These aren't weapons in any sense we understand. They're more like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like a cosmic eraser. Whatever they hit doesn't just get destroyed, it gets unmarked from reality." By the 6th hour, 4 more colonies had been silent. The hegemony's long-range sensors tracked the caracol fleet's movement, systematic, methodical, unstoppable. They moved from system to system like a lawnmower cutting grass, leaving nothing behind but empty space where worlds had been. The galactic powers continued their retreat, creating defensive lines deeper in inhabited space. The Zephyrians had already withdrawn their crystal cities into higher dimensional space. The Swarm Collective had scattered its billion components across 1,000 worlds. Even the mighty hegemony had pulled back their primary fleets, citing tactical necessities. "Cowards," muttered Navigator Kaiwu, watching another allied fleet disappear into hyperspace. "They're survivors," Sora corrected. "But so are we." The human fleet had taken position at the edge of the Ross 154 system, where a small colony of mountain climbers from Tibet had carved settlements into the walls of crystalline canyons. The colonists refused evacuation, just as stubbornly as their Earth ancestors had clung to their high peaks. "Captain," called Communications Officer Da Jung, "we're receiving transmission from the Defiant. Commander Jae-min is requesting permission to advance." Sora smiled grimly. The Defiant was a converted mining ship, its hull scarred from asteroid impacts and plasma mining. It had no business in a space battle, but Jae-min had welded military-grade weapons to its frame with the determination of a man protecting his family. "Granted. All ships, begin advance. Remember, we're not here to win, we're here to buy time." The human fleet moved forward in what other species would have called chaos. Unlike the precise formations of the hegemony or the organic swarms of the collective, the human ships seemed to flow like water, each captain making independent decisions. Convert freighters flew alongside experimental warships, mining vessels, heavy with improvised weapons, even luxury yachts armed with anything that could deal damage. The first encounter happened at the asteroid belt surrounding Ross 154's gas giant. 7 caracol vessels emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their black hulls drinking in the light of the system's red dwarf star. They paused, if ancient machines could pause, as if surprised to find resistance. Lieutenant Commander Taeho, aboard the retrofit cruiser Soul's Pride, was the first to open fire. His ship's weapons were a mixture of human railguns and salvaged alien energy cannons, all jury-rigged together in ways that should have been impossible. "All weapons, fire at will," he ordered. The human barrage struck the lead caracol ship like a storm of metal and energy. The alien shields flared, absorbing most of the damage, but something strange happened. The shield harmonics fluctuated, showing patterns that didn't match any known defensive technology. "They're analyzing our weapons," reported Tactical Officer Min-hee. "Adapting in real time. Then we change faster than they can adapt," Taeho replied. "All ships, Execute Pattern Chaos Alpha. What followed defied every tactical manual ever written. The human ships broke formation, scattering like startled birds before regrouping in seemingly random patterns. Captain Sora led her squadron in, a dive straight between two enemy dreadnoughts, her ship's hull groaning under the stress of sudden acceleration. "Target the junction points," she ordered, studying the enemy ships with an engineer's eye. Every artificial structure had weak points, where components joined. Ki-hyun, overload the reactor on my mark. Her weapons officer, pale but determined, stared at his controls. "Captain, that's suicide. If we channel that much power to the forward batteries..." "Do it." The indomitable dove deeper between the enemy ships, its hull temperature rising as it channeled incredible amounts of power into its weapons. At point-blank range, Sora gave the order. The energy discharge vaporized her ship's forward armor and overloaded half the systems, but the focused beam punched through the junction point between two caracol vessels. The result was spectacular. The ancient ship's carefully balanced systems couldn't handle the structural failure. One dreadnought listed to starboard, its weapons offline. The second ship's automatic repair systems began cannibalizing its own hull to fix the damage. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Commander Jamin rammed his converted mining ship into an enemy destroyer, his drilling lasers boring through armor never designed to face such crude direct attacks. The yacht Golden Lotus, piloted by a former racing champion named Hai-Wan, used its speed to dance between enemy weapons, delivering precision strikes to sensor arrays. The caracol responded with machine efficiency, adapting their tactics to counter human strategies. But just as they adjusted to one approach, the humans switched to something else entirely. Engineer Heejin worked frantically at her station aboard the Indomitable, sweat beading on her forehead as she analyzed enemy systems. "Their weapons are designed to counter predictable movements," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "But they can't adapt to our chaos." The revelation was startling. The caracol were perfect war machines. Too perfect. Their AI systems could calculate optimal responses to any logical tactical approach, but human tactics weren't logical. They were intuitive, emotional, desperate. When Captain Youngmin's corvette took critical damage, he didn't disengage or follow protocol. Instead, he flew directly into the enemy formation, using his ship as a missile. The explosion took out 3 caracol fighters. When the assault carrier Busan lost all its weapons, Captain Hyo-jung opened the launch bays and released mining. Drones programmed with civilian construction algorithms. The simple machines designed to cut rock and move ore confused the enemy targeting systems long enough for other ships to close distance. Lieutenant Min-soo, aboard the heavy cruiser Gangnam-soo, grimaced as another human ship exploded nearby. "Is that what we're calling strategy now, Chaos?" "Better than death," his commander Taeho muttered, ordering another seemingly suicidal maneuver that somehow worked. The human ships fought like a pack of wolves attacking a larger predator, darting in and out, striking where least expected, never staying still long enough for the enemy to target effectively. When conventional weapons failed, they improvised. Mining charges became torpedoes, cargo containers became kinetic missiles, construction mechs became boarding parties. The battle at Ross 154 lasted 18 hours. When the caracol finally withdrew, the human fleet had lost 40% of its ships. But something unprecedented had happened. The ancient enemy had retreated. For the first time in 15 million years, the unstoppable caracol war machine had found something it couldn't immediately crush. Captain Sora stood on her damaged bridge, looking at the tactical display. 3 caracol ships were drifting powerless, their systems confused by weapons and tactics their creators had never imagined facing. "Status report," she ordered. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, reported Engineer Hyejin. "Main reactor stable but running at 60%. We've lost forward shields and most of our long-range sensors." Communications Officer Da Jung looked up from her station. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's from the Hegemony's 7th Fleet." Sora activated the display, showing the stern face of Hegemony Admiral Stark Windover Stone. The alien's metal-plated features showed something Sora had never seen before, respect. "Human Captain Sora," the Admiral said, its artificial voice carrying new tones. "Our sensors detected the battle. We miscalculated. Your tactics are impossible. Your strategy defies logic. Your courage shames us." Sora smiled wearily. "Admiral, we're just too stubborn to die sensibly." The transmission ended, and she turned to her crew. They were battered, exhausted, frightened, but they were alive and they had done something the galaxy's greatest powers said was impossible. "All stations," she announced, "prepare for the next wave. If they want our worlds, they'll have to take them one at a time." Outside the viewports, the stars seemed a little brighter than before. The news of Ambassador Jinsu's death hit the human fleet like a cold wave. The old diplomat had fallen during the Battle of Proxima, his command ship sacrificing itself to cover the evacuation of 3 million civilians. Admiral Da-Un received the promotion in the rubble of her own bridge, her uniform torn and bloodied. "Ma'am," whispered Communications Officer Yu-Jin, "Fleet Command is requesting your orders." Da-Un looked at the tactical display hovering above the command center. The Caracol had finally understood what humanity was doing. They'd stopped trying to match human chaos with machine logic. Instead, they were bringing overwhelming force. The fleet approaching Beta Centauri was unlike anything seen before. 1,200 vessels, arranged in a perfect sphere of destruction. Each ship was the size of a city, bristling with weapons that could unmake matter itself. The human fleet defending the system numbered just 400 ships, most barely spaceworthy. Mining vessels with welded-on weapon systems, luxury yachts converted into fighters. Even a few old Earth exploration ships, their hulls patched with whatever materials could be found. But between Beta Centauri and the galactic core lay 12 major evacuation routes. Millions of ships from dozens of species fled along these paths, carrying the populations of entire worlds, the hegemony's military families, Zephyrian crystal children who hadn't learned to phase into higher dimensions, swarm nursery clusters containing billions of larvae. Even the proud Celestials, ancient beings of pure energy, had condensed themselves into portable forms to escape. "All units, this is Admiral Da-Un," she broadcast across all frequencies. Her voice carried the weight of a species that had never learned to quit. "Enemy contact in 6 hours. Our mission is simple. Cover the civilian transports. Keep the evacuation routes open. Captain Sang-Min, commanding the converted cargo hauler." Busan Express transmitted back with a grim laugh. "Hear that, crew? We're buying time with our lives. At least make them pay full price." The Caracol sphere approached Beta Centauri with the patience of an avalanche. As it drew closer, the human fleet could see the impossible details of the enemy. Ships. Their hulls weren't made of metal or any known material. They seemed to be patches of space itself, twisted into solid form. Weapons ports opened like wounds in reality, revealing glimpses of the void between dimensions. Lieutenant Commander So Jung, aboard the destroyer Incheon's Fury, watched her sensors with growing dread. "Ma'am," she reported to the flagship, "our weapons won't even scratch them. The energy output required to breach their shields would vaporize our own ships." "Then we don't breach them," Da-Un replied calmly. "We confuse them." The first phase of the battle began as the Caracol sphere reached the system's edge. They opened. Fire simultaneously, 1,200 beams of annihilation reaching across space. The human fleet scattered like leaves in a storm, each ship following its own evasive pattern. But something was different. The Caracol hadn't fired at the human warships. They'd targeted the evacuation vessels. "They're learning," breathed navigation. Officer Minjae aboard the indomitable Decepticon. "They know we'll sacrifice ourselves for the civilians." Captain Inar, commanding Fighter Squadron 7, watched 3 refugee vessels disappear in bursts of non-light. Hundreds of thousands of beings from a dozen worlds gone in an instant. Rage filled her voice as she keyed her comm. "All fighters, new mission. We're not defending ourselves anymore. Form up for Kamikaze Run Alpha." Her squadron was a mix of human fighters and whatever small craft volunteers had brought. Racing ships, personal transports, even a few maintenance pods armed with mining charges. They formed a ragged arrow pointed at the heart of the Caracol formation. "Remember," Inar transmitted, We need to punch a hole big enough for the evacuation ships. That's our job. Nothing else matters. The fighters dove into the caracol sphere, their small size making them harder to target than capital ships. The enemy's massive weapons tracked them, but the fighters darted between the giants like minnows among whales. Inar picked her target, a command vessel in the sphere's center, bristling with communications arrays and sensor clusters. Her fighter's reactor was already redlining as she pushed it beyond safe parameters. "For our homes," she whispered, and triggered the overload. The explosion tore through several decks of the caracol ship, but more importantly, it confused their perfect formation. Ships moved to fill the gap, their synchronization disrupted for precious seconds. In that moment of chaos, 12,000 civilian vessels boosted through the hole, racing toward the galactic core. Aboard the crippled cruiser, New Soul, engineer, J1 worked frantically at his jury-rigged console. The ship's main computer had been destroyed hours ago, so he'd connected dozens of smaller systems, calculators, game devices, even recipe apps. The result was a chaotic mess of code that somehow functioned. "Sir," called his assistant, "the caracol are trying to hack our targeting systems again." J1 grinned, sweat streaming down his face. "Let them try. Feed everything into the main processor, random number generators, stock market data, even that stupid cat video we use for morale. Give their AIs something to digest." The caracol ships had previously adapted quickly to human weapons and tactics. Their artificial intelligences were the most sophisticated ever created, capable of analyzing and countering any logical threat within microseconds. But now they faced something beyond logic, true randomness. As the random data streamed into their systems, the enemy ships began to falter. Their perfect formations wavered. Their weapons missed targets they should have hit easily. Their shields flickered as the harmonics couldn't match the chaotic frequencies. "It's working!" shouted J1 over the alarms. "They can't process true chaos. Their AIs are too structured, too perfect. They're choking on our randomness." The revelation spread through the human fleet instantly. Captains began broadcasting everything: personal messages, home, cooking shows, children's songs, poetry. The caracol fleet reeled as their systems tried to find patterns in the meaningless data flooding their networks. Captain Yun Ho, commanding the battlecruiser Gangneung, took advantage of the confusion. His ship was an ancient design, its weapons and shields generations behind the galactic standard. But now he closed to point-blank range with a caracol dreadnought, his guns firing continuously. "Target their weak points," he ordered. "Sensor arrays, communications nodes, anything that looks important. We can't hurt them, but we can blind them." The battle raged for 8 hours. The human fleet fought with desperate creativity, using every trick they could imagine. Mining ships became floating explosives. Construction mechs turned into boarding parties. Even the medical corvettes contributed, launching medical nanobots that played havoc with the caracol's biological components. Captain Jong-soo, aboard the frigate Ulsan's Pride, discovered that the enemy ships couldn't distinguish between actual threats and false ones. He programmed his ship's fabrication systems to create thousands of fake missiles, just empty shell with transmitters. The caracol wasted enormous amounts of firepower destroying decoys. As the battle reached its climax, Admiral Da-Yun made a desperate decision. The human fleet was down to less than 200 operational ships, but the evacuation routes were still partially blocked. "All remaining vessels," she broadcast, "form up on my position. We're going to ram the sphere." The response was immediate. Every functional human ship turned toward the center of the caracol formation. They flew together, not in perfect formation, but in a loose crowd, each captain making their own decisions about how to die. The caracol, their systems still struggling with the chaos virus, couldn't coordinate a proper response. They fired individually, destroying human ships one by one, but couldn't stop them all. The Seoul Express was the first to reach the enemy formation. Captain Minwoo had filled his cargo hold with every explosive he could find. The blast created a temporary gap in the sphere's structure. The corvette Jeonju followed, its captain ramming directly into a caracol communications hub. The destroyer Gwangju took out a weapons platform. The ancient cruiser, Daegu, collided with the sphere's central command ship. In the chaos that followed, 20,000 more evacuation vessels escaped through the gaps. Families who had fled their homes carried the memories of human sacrifice with them, the knowledge that a relatively young species had held the line when the galaxy's ancient powers had fled. Admiral Da-Un's flagship was among the last to fall. As the new Incheon broke apart around her, she transmitted one final message to the fleeing civilians. Tell them we stood our ground. Tell them humanity doesn't run from monsters. We run toward them. The Beta Centauri system fell 18 hours after the battle began, but the evacuation routes remained open, and millions of beings reached safety carrying stories of impossible human courage. In the depths of space, the scattered pieces of human ships drifted among the damaged caracol vessels. The ancient enemy had won, but for the first time in 15 million years they had been hurt. Their perfect systems had been infected with something they couldn't understand or counter, the chaotic, illogical, beautiful madness of humanity. The survivors, both human and alien, carried forward a new understanding. Sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in being perfect, but in being unpredictably, gloriously flawed. The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. The caracol had met an enemy they couldn't compute, couldn't predict, couldn't ultimately defeat. They had met humanity at its finest, stubborn, crazy, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. The stars witnessed, and the universe would remember. The transmissions spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Recordings of human ships ramming caracol dreadnoughts, audio logs of Admiral Da-Un's final words, tactical analyses showing impossible victories against overwhelming odds. The footage was raw, chaotic, and utterly compelling. In the hegemonies, evacuation convoys' junior officers watched the recordings with growing shame. Their species prided itself on military discipline and honor, yet they had fled while humans fought to the death. Lieutenant Stoneclaw in Steel threw off her insignia and stole a patrol craft, racing toward the front lines, aboard a swarm refugee ship. A young drone designated Seeker of Distant Stars watched the humans fight with growing fascination. Their tactics made no sense by collective standards, yet they worked. When the Queen Mind wasn't watching, Seeker quietly separated from the group and headed toward human space. The first defectors arrived just as Captain Sora was rebuilding her fleet at the Kepler Station repair yards. Her new flagship, New Sol, was a hybrid monstrosity, human hull architecture supporting alien technologies nobody fully understood. The crew was learning to operate weapons that required 3 different species to maintain properly. Captain, called Communications Officer Da Jung, "We've got an unscheduled arrival, Zephyrian crystal ship, but the pilot is broadcasting human rock music." On the main screen appeared a young Zephyrian whose crystalline form pulsed with harmonic frequencies that vaguely matched the beat of the song. Unlike the ancient, perfectly symmetric crystals of their elders, this one had grown in chaotic patterns, asymmetrical, almost organic. "I am called Resonance Through Chaos," the alien spoke in accented standard. "I bring gifts for the humans who fight when others flee." The boarding was complicated. Zephyrians weren't supposed to exist in normal space without special containment, but Resonance had somehow modified their own structure to withstand it. They crystallized directly onto the bridge, their form crackling with energy. "Your shields," Resonance communicated through both sound and light patterns. "They protect through strength. Ours protect through redirection, phase shifting, dimension, dancing together." Chief Engineer Hyejin worked alongside the crystal being for days, creating something unprecedented. The resulting shield system absorbed energy like human technology, but scattered it in patterns no attacker could predict. Part science, part art, part chaos. More defectors arrived daily. Young hegemony warriors who wanted to fight, not run. Celestials who had condensed into physical form specifically to help humans. Even a few ancient Vortan, their metal bodies scarred from a dozen wars, came seeking the chance to face an enemy worthy of their hatred. The breakthrough came when Dr. Junho, working with equipment from 6 different species, finally understood what made humans unique. His lab aboard the research vessel Sejong had become a maze of interconnected systems, each one processing data in ways that hurt to think about. "Look at this," he said, calling together his mixed crew. The hologram showed brain scans from a dozen species, each displaying different patterns of neural activity when faced with tactical decisions. "The hegemony thinks in linear progressions, if this then that," he explained. "The swarm thinks in parallel processes, all possibilities at once. Zephyrians think in harmonic resonances, everything connected to everything else." He paused, highlighting human brain patterns. They were chaotic, random, making connections that seemed impossible. "We don't just think differently. We think wrong. By every other species' standards, human thought processes are fundamentally flawed." Commander Unbi, a former evacuation coordinator who'd volunteered for combat duty, nodded slowly. "And the Caracol? Perfect artificial minds," Junho continued. "They can counter any logical pattern, adapt to any systematic approach. But chaos, true randomness, they treat it as corrupted data to be fixed." The realization transformed human tactics. Instead of trying to be more like other species, they leaned into their own chaotic nature. Command decisions were made by random selection, battle plans were generated by children playing games, orders were given in poetry and song. Young Jae, the communications officer aboard New Seoul, found himself working directly with a swarm collective node. The alien was a living computer, its thoughts visible as patterns of moving light beneath its chitinous shell. "Your species thinks in straight lines," the node observed in its clicking voice. "Ours thinks in networks. Together we create something new." The result was extraordinary. Human intuition guided alien precision, unpredictable strategies executed with perfect coordination. Ships began fighting in formations that looked like abstract art, but moved with deadly efficiency. The first major victory came at the Wolf 359 system. The Caracol had expected to find the usual human resistance, chaotic but ultimately predictable. Instead, they faced a hybrid fleet that fought like nothing in their databases. Zephyrian ships phase-shifted at random intervals, creating holes in space-time that human vessels used as shortcuts. Swarm bioships merged temporarily with human cruisers, sharing processing power and weapon systems. Hegemony warriors, drunk on human battle songs, charged alongside mining ships converted into rams. Captain Wu Jin, commanding a squadron of mixed vessels, coordinated an attack that defied every known law of physics. His ships moved in patterns that looked like children's drawings, circles and spirals and loops that somehow delivered devastating firepower to enemy weak points. "How?" demanded his hegemony second-in-command Admiral Forge of Distant Wars. "This makes no tactical sense." "That's the point," Wu Jin replied, launching his fighter squads in a formation that resembled a flock of birds. "They can't counter what they can't understand." The Caracol, faced with this impossible fusion of chaos and precision, began making mistakes. Small errors at first, firing sequences off by microseconds, shields calibrated for conventional attacks that never came. But those tiny mistakes cascaded into larger ones. A Caracol battleship, designed to counter linear attack patterns, found itself surrounded by ships moving in impossible curves. Its targeting computers couldn't lock onto vessels that phase-shifted through dimensions while broadcasting cooking recipes. Its shields, calibrated for energy weapons, struggled against purely kinetic attacks delivered by converted cargo haulers. Dr. Nari Young, a xenopsychologist who joined the fleet, made another crucial discovery while studying captured Caracol systems. "They're not just machines," she reported during the daily tactical briefing. "They have something like instincts, and they're starting to panic." The evidence was in the data streams. Caracol ships hesitating before attacking, changing course without tactical reason, even friendly fire incidents as their perfect coordination broke down. "We're not just beating them," observed Commander Tae Min, studying the battle reports. "We're teaching them to be afraid." Ambassador Yu Dong-hun, now representing the Seoul Federation, stood slowly. The man who had replaced Jin-Soo carried the weight of human sacrifice on his shoulders. "The galaxy is safe because we stood together, not just humans, but all of us, young and old, logical and chaotic, order and madness." The Congress voted unanimously to establish the Human-Initiated Defense Coalition. But this wasn't humanity ruling over others. It was humanity showing others that differences weren't weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be celebrated. Admiral. Da-Hun gave the closing address, her uniform bearing medals from a dozen worlds. We didn't fight because we were the strongest. We fought because running was never an option, not when others needed time, not when home was threatened, not when doing right mattered more than staying alive. The chamber erupted not in the polite applause of diplomatic protocol, but in genuine celebration. Beings who had never made sound roared approval. Species that communicated through color painted the air with joy. The floor vibrated with stamping, feet, hooves, claws, and artificial limbs. In the weeks that followed, the story spread throughout the galaxy. Children of every species learned about the humans who stood when others fled. Scientists studied how chaos could be weaponized. Military academies taught courses on human tactical unpredictability. But perhaps the most important lesson was simpler. The universe was vast, filled with different ways of thinking and living. Sometimes the greatest strength came not from being perfect, but from embracing imperfection. Not from being logical, but from being beautifully, defiantly, gloriously human. The Caracol threat was ended, but the human-initiated defense coalition continued its mission, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, standing against tyranny in all its forms, and always remembering that when every calculation suggested running, sometimes the only right choice was to plant your feet and fight. Years later, when a new threat emerged from the galactic edge, the response was swift. Ships from 100 worlds flying in deliberately chaotic formation met the enemy at the border. On every bridge, in every bunker, on every world that chose to stand rather than flee, the same message was broadcast. This is the human-initiated defense coalition. We don't run from monsters. We show them what monsters can become when they mess with our family. The galaxy had learned to fight like humans, and in doing so, they had learned to hope like humans too. The end.